I grew up in a family where women did not wait to be rescued, and the lesson settled into my bones long before I understood its name. My great-grandmother broke a gambling husband's authority with one decisive act, and never apologized for the peace that followed. My mother dismantled a lifetime of infidelity with paperwork and timing so precise it looked like mercy from a distance. By the time it was my turn, the world had already labeled me beautiful and dangerous, as if those traits were mutually exclusive and required a warning sign. I didn't mind the rumors. Rumors are cheaper than armor, and sometimes they do the work for you. For years, nothing happened, which was almost disappointing. Peace can feel like stagnation when you've been trained for storms. I finished school, worked, and learned the subtle geometry of boundaries. Then a call arrived 2 weeks before a holiday weekend. My cousin was getting married in a mountain town far from the city, and the bride's side was short one attendant. The family asked me to go not because I was gentle, but because I was reliable. I packed light. My mother reminded me to avoid headlines. My grandmother smiled and said headlines fade faster than lessons. The town was small and proud of traditions that excused cruelty as celebration. From the moment I arrived, the groom's friends treated hospitality like a dare, measuring how far they could push before being stopped. The groom himself practiced a careful silence that he mistook for neutrality. I watched, listened, and counted exits. The bridesmaids were city girls who had never needed to calculate such things. Fear traveled faster than advice. When the door finally closed and laughter sharpened into hands, I let the performance run just long enough to reveal intent. Control is not volume, it is timing. When the lock clicked, the room changed. What had been a hunt became a classroom. I didn't raise my voice. I raised certainty. The others followed my rhythm because panic dissolves when someone names, steps. No blood, no bruises that could not be explained by clumsiness and gravity. Pain that teaches without souvenirs. We left together, intact, and arrived at the ceremony as if nothing had happened. Because sometimes the most effective warning is the absence of spectacle. The groom asked questions that were really accusations. I answered with calm that felt like insult. Then consequences walked in on their own legs. The men who had been so brave minutes earlier staggered into daylight carrying the truth on their bodies. The room learned a new rule. Celebration does not grant immunity. Cameras, when they exist, remember better than witnesses. Silence became agreement. Agreement became survival. I thought the story would end there. It did not. Months later, the marriage collapsed into the shape it had always been heading toward. Money vanished. Calls went unanswered. A single account, designed as a last resort, began to empty itself with the regularity of a pulse. That is how we knew something had gone very wrong. Families like mine do not argue with denial. We verify. We traveled back quietly, not as a mob but as a process. We gathered facts the way accountants gather numbers, with patience and proof. The house at the edge of town was smaller than the lies that had sold it. When the door opened, what stepped out was a version of my cousin that grief had edited down to essentials. There are injuries that announce themselves and injuries that whisper. Both matter. The strategy was simple because greed simplifies people. A transfer large enough to tempt, timed to be undeniable, recorded without flourish. The response arrived exactly as predicted. When you design an experiment properly, the result feels less like revenge and more like arithmetic. Fire attracts attention. Attention attracts witnesses. Witnesses attract the law. No one needed to shout. The chain of events spoke for itself. Physical harm documented. Financial movement logged. Prior behavior contextualized. The difference between chaos and consequence is filing order. When the papers were served, shock looked like confusion, then fear, then bargaining. Bargaining failed. Afterward, recovery was not dramatic. It was clinical. Therapy appointments, legal consultations, a plan that traded urgency for stability. Freedom is not a single door. It is a corridor with lights you must keep on. My cousin chose education over apology, distance over nostalgia. The family closed ranks not to smother, but to support. I returned to my life with a gift heavy enough to bruise my arm and light enough to make me laugh. Wealth earned honestly has a different weight. Rumors adjusted themselves again, as they always do, searching for a villain because stories are lazier than people. I let them. The lesson had already landed where it needed to. If there is a moral, it is this. Safety is not luck, and love is not endurance. When celebration turns predatory, leave together. When promises become traps, read the fine print. And when someone mistakes your silence for consent, Remember that timing is a language. Speak it fluently. The week after we returned to the city, the story tried to shrink itself. People in the mountain town called it a misunderstanding, a joke that ran too far, a tradition that outsiders did not appreciate. I had heard that kind of language before. Words used like blankets to smother smoke, but the details would not stay quiet. A door that had clicked, hands that had reached, laughter that had sharpened. Those are not misunderstandings. They are intentions. What surprised me was how quickly fear changes shape once it is named. The bridesmaids who had frozen in that room began to speak in full sentences again. Not all at once. First in private messages, then in phone calls, then in a group chat where everyone kept apologizing for not doing more. I told them what my mother told me. Apologies are useful only if they turn into plans. We made plans. We saved screenshots. We wrote down timelines while memories were still warm. We compared notes the way people compare maps before crossing a river. The bride did not want a scandal. She wanted a wedding. That was the tragedy. She had been taught to believe those were the same thing. Her mother asked me, gently, if we could let it go for one weekend, just so the photos could look happy. I asked her if she would trade her daughter's safety for a picture frame. The question was not polite, so it worked. She went quiet, then nodded once, as if admitting a debt she had hoped not to pay. The groom's friends, meanwhile, performed innocence. They joked louder. They slapped each other's backs and told stories about city girls who did not know how to have fun. I watched them the way my great-grandmother watched card players. Not for what they said, but for what they avoided. They avoided eye contact with the women. They avoided the hallway outside that room. They avoided the cameras in the lobby until they forgot, and then they walked past them again, laughing, carrying their own guilt like luggage they insisted was light. I did not demand justice that night. I demanded options. I asked the hotel manager for a copy of the hallway footage and wrote down his refusal. I asked the venue coordinator for the guest list and photographed the clipboard when she wasn't looking. I asked the bride's aunt for the local contact of a women's support organization, because small towns always have someone doing quiet work. By morning, we had a folder. Not a dramatic folder, a practical one. Proof is more persuasive when it looks boring. The ceremony happened anyway. It was bright and expensive and filled with music that makes people pretend they are not thinking. I wore a calm face because calm is sometimes the sharpest weapon. When the groom leaned in to ask why his friends looked unwell, I told him the truth in the plainest way possible. They learned a boundary. He laughed once, uncertain, then watched me a little too closely for the rest of the day. That attention was useful. Men who think they are in control often reveal themselves by how quickly they notice they are not. After we got home, the bridesmaids did what people do after survival. They went back to routine and tried to pretend routine would heal them. Some of them could. One couldn't sleep. One couldn't shower without checking the door twice. One got angry at her own reflection, as if her body had betrayed her by being noticed. I did not lecture them about strength. I gave them numbers to call, therapists who did not treat fear like drama, and a script for when relatives asked why they were being sensitive. Sensitivity is not weakness. It is an alarm system. You don't smash an alarm because it's loud. I assumed the town would swallow the incident and move on. I underestimated how greedy people become when they believe silence is guaranteed. 3 months later, my cousin's bank called about unusual transfers. Small amounts at first, then a rhythm. Withdrawals timed like someone had learned her schedule. The account was a safety net my mother had set up, hidden behind unremarkable labels. It had been touched only once before, during a medical emergency. Seeing it drain felt like watching someone dig under a house you still lived in. We didn't panic. Panic makes you hurry, and hurrying makes you sloppy. We did what our family always does. We verified. My mother pulled statements. My grandmother called an old friend who knew a detective who owed her a favor. I checked my cousin's phone for login alerts and found a string of password reset emails she had ignored because she was exhausted and because exhaustion is how traps stay open. We traced the transfers to an account in the same mountain town, the same cluster of names, the same orbit. My cousin was embarrassed. She kept saying it was her fault, that she should have noticed, that she should have been smarter. I asked her if she blamed herself for the weather too. Shame is a clever thief. It convinces you to guard your own wounds instead of your own rights. We reminded her, gently and repeatedly, that being targeted is not a moral failure. It is simply evidence that someone saw an opportunity and lacked restraint. Before we traveled back, We rehearsed the boring parts. My mother sat with my cousin at the kitchen table and had her change every password, one by one, on paper, with a system that made sense even when you were shaking. We enabled multi-factor authentication. We updated recovery emails. We printed backup codes and sealed them in an envelope. None of it felt heroic, but it was the work that makes heroism unnecessary. I also called the bridesmaids, not for gossip, but for consent. If we escalated, their names might surface. I wanted them to decide, not be dragged. One told me she couldn't handle it yet. I thanked her and said that was valid. Another surprised herself by saying yes. She said she was tired of being polite about fear. We created a shared document where everyone could contribute anonymously if they preferred. Agency can begin with something as small as choosing whether to type your name. The bride's messages, at that point, were still careful. She wrote as if someone was reading over her shoulder. Short phrases, no details. The only thing consistent was her apology. She apologized for breathing. I replied with the same sentence every time. Not because I wanted repetition, but because she needed a stable surface. You don't have to apologize for surviving. After the 5th time, she finally responded, "Okay." That single word felt like a door opening. A week later, an unfamiliar number called me. A woman's voice said she worked at the venue and that she'd seen my questions at the wedding. She told me she couldn't testify publicly because her job depended on the groom's family, but she could tell me where the cameras were and which one covered the hallway. She described the hard drive the footage was stored on, detail you only share after watching injustice pile up for years. Small towns have long memories, so do the women who keep them running. We learned, too, that the groom's friend had bragged about teaching city girls a lesson in a bar the night after the wedding. He'd said it loudly enough for a bartender to hear. The bartender didn't like him. The bartender liked tips, but he liked decency more. We didn't ask the bartender to be brave. We asked him to write down what he'd heard and sign it. Courage is easier when it looks like a statement, not a confrontation. My grandmother, practical as ever, warned us not to confuse revenge with resolution. She said revenge makes your pulse feel strong, but it doesn't rebuild a life. Resolution, she said, is a schedule. Legal filings, health checks, new routines, money safeguarded, friends chosen carefully. She also reminded me to eat. Trauma makes people forget their bodies until the body forces attention. She cooked soup and left it on the stove like a quiet command. The night before we left, my cousin asked me what I'd done in that locked room. She had been there, but fear edits memory. She remembered the click. She remembered my voice. She didn't remember the steps. I told her I had done nothing magical. I had done what every woman learns sooner or later. I had made the room expensive for them. Not with spectacle, but with consequences. I reminded her the secret was not strength. The secret was refusing to be impressed by men who confuse cruelty with power. On the drive back to the mountain town, my mother kept the radio low and the car steady. My cousin stared out the window like she was watching a different life pass by. At a rest stop, she suddenly asked if she was allowed to miss the groom, even after everything. I said grief doesn't ask permission. Grief just shows up. Missing someone who hurt you is not proof you were wrong. It's proof you are human. She nodded and cried in a bathroom stall, then washed her face and came out looking older in the best way, like someone who had decided to stop bargaining with reality. When we arrived, we didn't march straight to the house. We walked the town first. We noted who watched us, who looked away, who smiled like they knew more than they said. We visited the bank, where a teller recognized my cousin and immediately asked if she was okay. That question, from a stranger behind glass, mattered. It told us the story had already leaked, even if people were pretending it hadn't. Shame spreads, but so does solidarity. We also stopped by a small office above a bakery, where a volunteer advocate met us with tea and a clipboard. She didn't ask for drama. She asked for dates, names, and whether there were weapons in the home. She asked whether the bride had a safe place to sleep. The questions were blunt, not because she lacked empathy, but because she understood time. There is a phase when you can still move quickly before fear hardens into routine. Back at our hotel, I wrote down everything I remembered from the wedding weekend in a plain, chronological list. My handwriting looked like someone else's. Memory, under stress, becomes a ledger. I kept the list anyway. Later, in interviews, the smallest details mattered the time the music changed. The exact joke someone told, the way a hand hovered. Predators rely on vagueness. Precision is a kind of defense. My cousin, despite her fear, insisted on calling the bride herself. She didn't want the bride to feel collected by strangers. The call was short. My cousin asked if the bride was safe. The bride said, "Not always." My cousin said, "Come with us when you can." The bride whispered, "I'm trying." After the call, my cousin sat very still. She said she had never realized how much effort it takes to say the truth out loud. I told her that truth is often heavy at first because it has been carried alone. We returned to the town quietly, not as a caravan but as a sequence. One of us arrived first to book rooms and observe. Another arrived second to visit the bank. I arrived last, because I wanted the people who had underestimated me to see my face only when it mattered. The groom's family lived in a house at the edge of town, small, tidy, and full of clutter that looks like stability. The front porch held potted plants. The inside held lies. The bride opened the door. The version of her who stood there was different from the one in the wedding photos. She was thinner, quieter, and her eyes kept checking the hallway behind her. That glance told me more than any confession. She invited us in like someone inviting inspectors. Her husband was not home. She said it the way people say the tide is out, like a fact you cannot argue with. My cousin sat beside her, close enough to touch, and did not mention the bruises on her own voice. We didn't accuse first. We asked questions that sounded ordinary. How had she been? Had she slept? Was she eating? And then we asked the questions that matter. Who had access to her accounts? Who knew her passwords? Who handled the bills? She tried to answer with half-truths, because half-truths are safer than full ones when you still live with a man who punishes honesty. My mother slid a printed statement across the coffee table. Numbers do not argue. They just sit there. That night, the groom returned. He walked in with the confidence of someone who expects a warm meal and a quiet house. He saw us, and his expression tightened, then smoothed again. He tried charm first, then he tried offense. He asked why we were there, why we were stirring trouble, why women could not let things go. I watched him cycle through strategies like someone flipping through old keys. None fit. He accused my cousin of being dramatic. He accused me of being controlling. He accused our family of wanting money. My grandmother, who had been silent until then, looked at him and said, softly, that she had met men like him before, and that they always mistook patience for permission. The groom laughed, and the laugh was a crack. People reveal themselves when they laugh at things that aren't jokes. We left without a fight. That was deliberate. Violence makes a mess you have to clean. We wanted him to feel safe. We wanted him to keep moving exactly as he always moved, because predictable behavior is the easiest to document. The next day, we set a trap that wasn't really a trap. It was an invitation to be himself. My mother arranged a transfer large enough to tempt, small enough to be believable, timed so the bank would flag it if it moved again. We told the bride, in private, exactly what we were doing and asked her if she could hold steady for 48 hours. She nodded, tears in her eyes, not out of weakness, but because she'd been holding steady for months without anyone acknowledging the weight. The groom's friend, the one who bragged the loudest at the wedding, took the bait first. He called my cousin, pretending concern, asking if she was okay, offering to help. The call was recorded. He asked leading questions, trying to get her to admit she owed them money, trying to rewrite history into a debt. My cousin followed the script like a professional. She sounded confused. She sounded hopeful. She sounded exactly what predators like to hear. Then she hung up and exhaled like someone coming up for air. The money moved that afternoon. The bank logged it. The account details matched our findings. We had the financial trail. Now we needed the pattern. Meanwhile, the bride's phone quietly sent us location pings when her husband took it to fix something. The pings matched the friend's workplace. The friend's workplace matched the ATM where the cash withdrawals happened. The world became small and clean in the way it does when you stop telling yourself you are imagining things. When you grow up around women who handle storms, you learn that confrontation is a tool, not a lifestyle. We confronted them only after the evidence could survive without our voices. The local police station smelled like old paper and coffee. The officer at the desk tried to smile at my cousin the way men smile when they want women to shrink. My mother slid the folder across the counter and asked, politely, for a report number. Politeness backed by paperwork is terrifying. The groom arrived at the station 30 minutes later, with the swagger of someone expecting to bully his way out. He walked in, saw the folder, and his eyes flickered. That flicker was the first honest thing he had shown us. He tried to turn it into a joke. He tried to call it a family matter. Then he tried anger. He raised his voice. The officer's posture changed. Men can ignore women's words, but they struggle to ignore women's documentation. The friend tried to lie. His lie was detailed, which is always a mistake. Detailed lies are easy to break because they have too many seams. The bank statements didn't match. The call recording didn't match. The timeline didn't match. His confidence fell apart not in one dramatic collapse, but in small corrections. I meant, and what I was saying was, and you're twisting my words. Twisting requires force. We hadn't used any. We just held the mirror steady. When the officer asked the bride if she felt safe going home, the bride hesitated. That hesitation was the loudest siren in the room. She looked at my cousin. My cousin reached for her hand. The bride finally said, very quietly, that she did not always feel safe. The room shifted. Family matter became domestic violence. Misunderstanding became pattern. Words, when placed correctly, change doors into exits. The law is slow because it is built to be careful, and careful can feel cruel when you are tired. The next months were not cinematic. They were appointments and forms, temporary orders and witness statements, meetings with lawyers who asked the same questions in different ways to make sure the answers held. My cousin moved back to the city. The bride, after 2 false starts, moved too. She stayed with an aunt first, then with my grandmother, because my grandmother's house had rules like sunlight. Simple, present, and impossible to argue with. My cousin saw a therapist who specialized in trauma. The therapist taught her that the body remembers even when the mind tries to tidy. She learned breathing techniques that felt stupid, until they saved her during a panic spiral in a grocery store aisle. She learned to stop apologizing for taking up space. She learned to tell the truth without explaining it 3 times. The groom's family tried shame. They called, texted, left voicemails about ruining a good man's future. They threatened lawsuits. They hinted at connections. They begged. The cycle repeated because they didn't know any other dance. My mother blocked numbers with the efficiency of someone clearing spam. My grandmother answered one call, listened in silence, then said, "Your son's future is not ours to protect," and hung up. I watched my cousin's shoulders drop as if a rope had been cut. In court, the groom wore a suit that was slightly too tight. He tried to look respectable. Respectability is easier to wear than responsibility. He looked at my cousin like she was an inconvenience, and at the judge like the judge was an employee. That arrogance, finally, worked against him. The judge asked questions that required answers, not performances. Our evidence did the speaking. The bank records, the call logs, the hotel footage, the witness statements from the bridesmaids, the medical report from the bride's clinic visit that she had hidden for months. Each piece was small on its own. Together, they formed a shape no one could pretend not to see. The men did not go to prison for the wedding incident, not directly. The law had limits, and timing matters. But they faced charges for harassment, fraud, and financial exploitation. The groom lost his job when his employer saw the documentation. The friend, who had once boasted about connections, discovered that connections disappear when you become a liability. The town, which had tried to protect its image, learned that images crack when people stop cooperating. The victory did not feel like fireworks. It felt like a door closing the right way. My cousin got her money back through restitution. The bride got a protective order and a divorce. Both of them got something harder, the right to breathe without calculating exits every minute. There was also the quiet work of relocation, which rarely appears in stories even though it is where many people lose momentum. We made checklists, collect documents, copy keys, change mailing addresses, freeze credit, separate phone plans, transfer medical records. We packed the bride's things in plain boxes so neighbors wouldn't ask questions. We labeled them with ordinary words, linens, books, winter, because ordinary labels are a kind of camouflage. The groom tried a different tactic when intimidation failed, charm. He sent the bride flowers with a note that sounded like a poem and read like a threat. He promised change and wrote the promise on paper as if paper made it true. The advocate told us to keep everything. We kept the flowers too, not for sentiment, but for fingerprints. The bride stared at the vase for a long time and then asked if she was a bad person for still wanting the apology to be real. I told her wanting an apology is not the same as trusting it. We learned that some people in town were angry at us not because they doubted what happened, but because acknowledging it would require them to relabel their own memories. They preferred their pasts to be simple. The advocate called it community denial. My grandmother called it cowardice. My mother called it predictable. I called it noise. Noise can be ignored when you have a plan. Online, the groom's friends tried to control the narrative. They posted vague statuses about fake accusations, and gold diggers and women ruining men's lives. None of it mentioned names, but everyone in town knew who they meant. One bridesmaid, the youngest, saw the posts and panicked, convinced strangers would show up at her apartment. We had her make her accounts private and taught her the difference between visibility and safety. We also reminded her that defamation is a legal word, not just an emotional one. People act bolder on screens until someone hands them a court summons. A lawyer we hired later explained that the best defense against smear campaigns is consistency. Don't argue with every rumor. Document the pattern. Keep records of posts, dates, and messages. File for protective orders with specifics. Let the system do what it can. It wasn't romantic advice, but it was effective. It made our lives less reactive, which is another way of saying less controlled by someone else. The bride, in my grandmother's house, started to recover in strange, small ways. She would wake early and clean the kitchen as if cleanliness could prevent violence. My grandmother gently redirected that energy into useful tasks. Learn to cook a new dish. Learn to change a tire. Learn to reset a router. If your hands need something, she said, give them a skill. Over time, the bride's cleaning turned into gardening. She planted herbs on the balcony, then smiled the first time a leaf survived. My cousin's recovery looked different. She was angry. Her anger was not loud. It was precise. She wrote pages of what she wished she had said at the wedding, what she wished she had noticed, what she wished the groom had been. Her therapist told her to write, then to stop writing when she felt her jaw unclench. That was the measure. Not perfection, but release. In one therapy session, my cousin admitted that she had always been afraid of being called difficult. She had mistaken softness for goodness and compliance for peace. Hearing her say it out loud made me realize how many women are trained to manage men's comfort as if it is a public service. We decided, together, to retire that job. We were not hired for it, and we were tired. There were nights when the bride woke from a nightmare and sat at the kitchen table with my grandmother, drinking tea like medicine. My grandmother didn't force her to talk. She told stories instead, stories of women leaving, women starting over, women doing ordinary things after extraordinary fear. The bride listened, like she was learning a language she hadn't been allowed to speak. Sometimes, at the end, she would whisper, "So it's possible." My grandmother would answer, "It's inevitable, if you keep walking." At the same time, I had my own reckoning. People praised me as if I had been fearless, and the praise made me uncomfortable because it simplified what had happened. I wasn't fearless. I was prepared. Preparation is less flattering, but it's more teachable. I started carrying a small notebook again, not to record danger, but to record methods. What questions to ask, what documents to request, what phrases keep conversations from turning into arguments. If I ever needed to help someone else, I wanted tools, not just adrenaline. A month after the police report, the local support office asked if we would speak at a private workshop for women in nearby towns. No cameras, no names. My cousin hesitated, then said yes. The bride said no, and that no mattered too. At the workshop, my cousin spoke about bank accounts and passwords, about how love does not require secrecy, about how embarrassment is not worth your safety. She didn't cry. She didn't perform. She simply told the truth and watched other women nod, as if recognizing themselves. Afterward, an older woman approached my cousin and said she wished she'd had words like that 20 years ago. My cousin squeezed her hand and said, "You have them now." That moment did not undo the past, but it changed the present in a way that felt like mercy. When the court date approached, the groom tried one last reach. He showed up outside my cousin's workplace, standing near the entrance as if he had every right to be there. My cousin froze. Then she remembered her therapist's script and walked back inside without looking at him. She called the police. She filed an incident report. She did not explain herself to colleagues beyond, "I'm handling it." Later, she told me the hardest part was resisting the urge to be polite. "Politeness," she said, "is the habit that almost got me trapped." The judge later referenced that incident in the hearing. Stalking patterns matter. The groom's lawyer tried to frame it as coincidence. The timestamp on the security camera said otherwise. Coincidence has a short attention span. Predators don't. The difference was visible in the data. In the middle of all this, the bridesmaids continued their own healing. One took a self-defense class and quit after 2 sessions because it made her feel worse, and her teacher told her she didn't have to force it. Another started running at night, not to become a fighter, but to feel her lungs work in a way that belonged to her. A third stopped drinking at parties because she realized she'd been using intoxication as a way to tolerate situations she didn't actually want. Their choices were different, but the direction was the same, toward control. I kept thinking about the word control and how people misunderstand it. They think it means domination. In our family, it means clarity. It means knowing what you will do next. It means refusing to be surprised by predictable cruelty. Control is not the opposite of softness. It is the frame that lets softness exist without being exploited. The bride eventually returned to the mountain town once, accompanied by the advocate, to collect the last of her belongings. She asked my cousin to come. My cousin went. They walked into the house together. The groom wasn't there, but his presence lingered in the way the air felt. The bride took her coat from a hook, her books from a shelf, and a small framed photo she had once thought proved she was happy. She looked at the photo and then, without drama, set it down. She didn't need proof anymore. She needed space. On the drive back from that trip, she told my cousin she had thought endurance was love. My cousin said she had thought the same thing. They sat in that shared realization for a while, then laughed softly. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd that anyone had taught them to confuse pain with virtue. By the time the case reached its final stage, we were tired in a deep way that feels like age. We also felt steady. That steadiness came from repetition of a different kind. Not repeated sentences, but repeated actions. Show up, document, rest, show up again. Persistence is the quiet engine of justice. Recovery, I learned, is not a straight line. My cousin had good weeks and bad ones. She could laugh freely and then cry because a stranger's cologne reminded her of a hallway. She could feel brave in the morning and small at night. We treated those swings as weather, not as failure. My mother cooked meals that required stirring, because stirring keeps the hands busy while the mind catches up. My grandmother taught the bride how to fix a loose cabinet hinge, because fixing something tangible teaches the nervous system that repair is real. As for me, I went back to my life. People asked what happened at the wedding in ways that tried to make it gossip. I gave them nothing they could chew into entertainment. I said only that we left together. The ones who mattered understood the subtext. Leaving together is a strategy, not a punchline. Months later, when the case finally resolved into paperwork stamped and filed, the anticlimax felt like mercy. Ordinary days returned. My cousin enrolled in a night course she had always postponed. The bride took a job in a bookstore and learned the pleasure of choosing which stories to take home. Our family calendar filled with birthdays and doctor appointments, and grocery runs normal things that used to feel boring and now felt like proof. After everything, I started noticing how often celebrations carry hidden tests. Office parties where someone jokes too close. Family dinners where an uncle's comment is treated like weather. Group trips where a locked door is called fun. The world is full of small rehearsals for bigger dangers. I stopped treating those moments as inevitable. I began naming them. Sometimes naming something ruins the mood. I learned to be okay with that. A mood is not a life. My mother joked that I had become the family's unofficial risk manager. She wasn't wrong. I created a short checklist for every event I attended. Who is my exit? Where is my phone? Who can I call? Who is with me? The checklist didn't make me paranoid. It made me free. When you know your options, you can relax enough to enjoy yourself. That is the irony. Boundaries create joy, not the other way around. The bridesmaids kept their group chat, but it changed tone. It stopped being a place to replay fear and became a place to share wins. Someone posted a picture of a door chain installed in her apartment. Someone posted a screenshot of her landlord agreeing to better lighting in the hallway. Someone posted a message to a younger sister. If anyone makes you uncomfortable, you leave, and you call me. The chat turned into a small, stubborn infrastructure of care. The bride, too, began to test her voice. The first time she corrected a stranger who called her by her ex-husband's last name, she went pale, then laughed in disbelief when nothing terrible happened. "It's that easy?" she asked. My grandmother said, "It's always been that easy to speak. It's just been expensive. Now you're the one setting the price." My cousin's restitution check arrived in the mail on a Tuesday, which felt like an insult to drama. She held it with both hands and stared at the number, as if it might vanish. Then she went to the bank, deposited it, and came home to cook dinner. It wasn't a celebration. It was a reclaiming. She told me later that the best part wasn't the money. It was knowing she had not been erased. The town, predictably, tried to rewrite the ending. Some people claimed the groom had been set up. Others said the bride was too sensitive. The advocate told us not to chase every lie. Let them talk, she said. Their version requires everyone to keep lying forever. Yours only requires you to keep living. She was right. Time is ruthless to false stories, because false stories need constant maintenance. One evening, months after the case closed, I ran into the venue coordinator in the city. She didn't recognize me at first. When she did, she looked relieved, as if she had been carrying a small guilt she hadn't known where to put. She said she had quit her job and started working for an event company with safer policies. It's not much, she said. I told her it was exactly the kind of change that reshapes a world. A refusal to keep normalizing harm. Sometimes I still wonder what would have happened if we had made a scene at the wedding, if we had screamed and fought and turned the night into a spectacle. Maybe the men would have been arrested. Maybe the town would have rallied against us faster. Maybe the bride would have been forced to choose sides while still trapped. I don't know. What I do know is that our choice, the quiet, coordinated exit, gave us time. And time gave us evidence. Evidence gave us leverage. Leverage gave us options. Options, in the end, are what safety looks like. A year later, at another family gathering birthday, not wedding, we made a small ritual without announcing it as one. When we arrived, we checked in with each other. When we sat down, we chose seats with clear sightlines. When someone made a joke that leaned too hard on humiliation, my cousin said, calmly, "That's not funny." And the room adjusted. No one yelled. No one stormed out. The world simply shifted a few degrees toward decency. It wasn't dramatic, but it was proof that the lessons had traveled. In our family, that is what victory looks like. The next gathering is safer than the last. After the workshop, the advocate sent me a binder titled, in plain font, Safety Planning. Inside were pages that looked like something you would hand to a new employee. Risk factors, emergency contacts, steps for leaving, steps for staying. I read it twice and felt anger rise not at the existence of the binder, but at how necessary it was. Still, I was grateful. Information is a form of shelter. I copied sections and gave them to friends, quietly, the way you pass someone an umbrella before the rain begins. My mother, who had been so steady through everything, admitted one night that she was exhausted. She said she sometimes feared that all her preparation had made her children see the world as dangerous. My grandmother shook her head and said, "No, preparation made them see the world as negotiable." That distinction mattered. Dangerous is a dead end. Negotiable is a map. In the spring, my cousin and the bride took a short trip together just 2 days by the sea. They sent me a photo of their feet in the sand, toes half buried, and a caption that said, "We left together again, but this time it was for something good." I stared at that message longer than I expected. Healing, I realized, is not only the absence of fear. It is the return of ordinary pleasures, claimed without apology. We didn't leave with perfect closure, but we left with each other. And that was enough to start over. Sometimes, late at night, I replay the sound of that lock clicking, not because I want to live there, but because I want to remember the exact moment the room changed, and I chose not to let it decide the ending. I have learned that safety is not luck, and love is not endurance. Love is alignment. Safety is practice. When celebration turns predatory, you do not negotiate with it. You leave, and you make sure you do not leave alone.